Today, I want to tell you about something that happened in California. It starts off looking like a woman finally finding her happily ever after, but ends up being one of the most patient murder plots I have ever heard about. So grab your snacks and get comfortable because this one is a slow burn. Hi, sweet ones. My name is Grandma Kitty, and before we dive in, take a second to subscribe if cases like this intrigue you. It helps me keep these stories coming, and while you're at it, tell me where you're watching from. That's how we find our neighbors here in our little true crime corner. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Linda Curry. Linda was born back in 1944 in California. She was a beautiful woman with big dreams and an even bigger heart. She had a sister who meant the world to her. The two of them shared a bond that was deep and unbreakable, the kind of bond where you tell each other everything and trust each other completely. Linda also had a large group of friends, and I mean a lot of friends. She was the type of woman people just gravitated towards. There was something warm about her, something inviting. People wanted to be around her. But here is the thing about Linda. When it came to love, she had not had the best luck. By the time this story really gets going, Linda had already been through 2 failed marriages. 2 times she walked down the aisle believing she had found her person. 2 times it fell apart, and she did not have any children from either marriage. Just heartbreak and lessons learned, or so she thought. But despite all that disappointment, Linda never gave up hope. She still believed that somewhere out there was a man who would love her the way she deserved to be loved. She was a romantic at heart, an optimist. Some might say too much of an optimist for her own good. Now, let me tell you about Linda's career, because this is important. Linda worked at the San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station in northern San Diego County. This was a serious job at a serious facility. She started at the bottom, working as a secretary. Nothing glamorous. Just answering phones and handling paperwork like millions of other women at that time. But Linda was not the type to stay at the bottom for long. She worked hard, really hard. She was dedicated, she was reliable, she took her job seriously, and it showed. Over time, she climbed her way up the ladder at Southern California Edison, which was the company that operated the plant. By the time she was in her 40s, Linda had risen to a management position. She was no longer the secretary, she was the boss. And she earned a very good salary to go along with that title. Linda had built herself a nice little life through nothing but hard work and determination. But here is the funny thing about Linda. For every dollar she made, she spent 2. At least that is what her friends used to joke about. Linda was extravagant. She liked nice things. She liked to shop. She liked to live well. Money came in and money went right back out. She was also incredibly hospitable. Linda loved having people over. Her door was always open to friends. She would host dinners and gatherings and just enjoy being surrounded by the people she cared about. Her friends adored visiting her because she always made them feel welcome. So there she was, a successful woman with a great job, wonderful friends, and a generous spirit. The only thing missing from her life was love, that one person to share it all with. Linda was still dreaming of finding the one. In 1981, Linda thought maybe she had found him. His name was Bill Sandretto. He was a life insurance salesman. Nice enough guy, stable, responsible, the kind of man who thought carefully about money and planned for the future. Now, you might already see the problem here. Linda spent money like water flowing from a faucet. Bill pinched every penny like it was his last. She was extravagant. He was frugal. It was oil and water from the very beginning. Bill did not like Linda's spending habits one bit. It bothered him. They argued about it a lot. Money became this constant source of tension between them. They could not seem to get on the same page no matter how hard they tried. And here is another thing. Even though they were together for years, there was never any talk of marriage, no engagement, no moving in together. They just dated and dated and dated without ever taking that next step. From 1981 to 1989, these two broke up and got back together more times than anyone could count. It was one of those on-again, off-again relationships that just could not seem to stick. Finally, in 1989, they called it quits for good. 8 years of trying and it just was not meant to be. But here is something unusual. Linda and Bill actually stayed friends after the breakup. Good friends. They kept the same circle of friends and continued to care about each other even though the romance was over. That does not happen very often when relationships end, but somehow they made it work. So there was Linda in 1989. She was 45 years old, single again, and still hoping to find love. To cheer herself up, she decided to do something special. She bought herself a house. And not just any house. This was a beautiful 2-story home in San Clemente, California. Big rooms, huge garden, the kind of place you see in magazines and think only rich people live there. Linda's friends absolutely loved this house. They would come over all the time just to hang out in that gorgeous space. Linda was happy to have them. She finally had her dream home. Now she just needed someone to share it with. And that is when Paul Curry walked into her life. It was 1989. Linda was at work when a new employee joined the company. His name was Paul Curry, and he was 32 years old. That made him 13 years younger than Linda. But age is just a number, right? Paul was hired as a consultant engineer. His job was to train other engineers on nuclear safety procedures. Important work, serious work, the kind of job that requires real intelligence and expertise. And boy, did Paul like to remind everyone just how intelligent he was. Every chance he got, Paul would mention that he was a member of Mensa. Now, if you do not know what Mensa is, let me explain. It is an organization for people with extremely high IQs. You have to pass special tests to get in. Only the smartest of the smart are accepted. Paul wanted everyone to know he was one of those special smart people. He also bragged about appearing on the television game show Jeopardy! And I have to admit, that is pretty impressive. Paul actually won on that show. He became a 2-time champion and took home $24,000 over 3 episodes. That is no small thing. You have to have serious knowledge and quick thinking to win on Jeopardy! So on paper, Paul Curry looked like quite the catch. Young, smart, successful, a television champion. What was not to like? Well, Linda's friends could think of a few things. They found Paul arrogant, full of himself. He was always talking about how intelligent he was, always finding ways to mention his accomplishments. It got old real fast. Linda's friends were not impressed. They thought he was a braggart who loved the sound of his own voice. But Linda saw something different. She thought Paul was confident, not arrogant. She believed he had every right to be proud of his accomplishments. In her eyes, he was capable and sure of himself, and that was attractive to her. She defended him whenever her friends said anything negative. Linda and Paul met at one of the training sessions at work. Even though Linda held a higher position than Paul in the company, there was an immediate spark between them. That 13-year age gap did not seem to matter. They liked each other, and things moved fast, real fast. Before long, Paul had moved into Linda's beautiful house in San Clemente. They were officially a couple, living together under one roof. Linda's friends watched nervously from the sidelines, hoping they were wrong about this guy. Then came September 12th. 1992, Linda and Paul flew to Las Vegas and got married. Just like that. Linda Curry became Mrs. Paul Curry, and she was over the moon with happiness. Third time is the charm, she probably thought. This was finally going to be the marriage that worked. Her friends were not so sure. Mary, Linda's best friend, had concerns. And Bill, Linda's ex-boyfriend, who had remained close to her, also had a bad feeling about Paul. They both noticed something troubling about the new husband. Paul did not seem as invested in the relationship as Linda was. He did not pay her much attention. He did not seem particularly in love with his new wife. There was an indifference about him that made people uncomfortable. Linda even confided to her friends that the intimate side of their marriage was practically non-existent. That is not exactly the sign of a passionate, newlywed romance. And then the money problem started. Now this is where things get really strange. Linda and Paul had a combined income of $140,000 a year. That was a lot of money back in the early 90s. A very comfortable living. Between her management salary and his engineering consultant pay, they should have been doing just fine. But suddenly, they were having financial troubles, bills were piling up, money was tight. None of it made sense. Linda had always been a big spender, sure, but she had never had actual money problems before. She always managed to cover everything. So what had changed? It turned out that Paul Curry had been keeping secrets. After the wedding, it came out that Paul had been married twice before, 2 previous wives that he conveniently forgot to mention while they were dating. And from those 2 marriages, he had 3 children. 3 kids that he was legally required to pay child support for every single month. That is where all the money was going. A big chunk of their income was being sent to Paul's ex-wives for his children. And he only bothered to tell Linda about this after they were already married. After she had already said I do and signed on the dotted line. Nice surprise, right? Linda decided to accept this new information and continue with the marriage anyway. She was committed. She wanted this to work. She also wanted her friends to give Paul a chance, so she would invite them over and praise her husband at every opportunity. But the more time her friends spent around Paul, the less they trusted him. Something about this man just was not right. Now, what Paul did next should have been the biggest red flag of them all. But before I tell you about it, I need you to do something for me. If you are still with me at this point in the story, just tap that like button real quick. It takes half a second and it really helps get this story out to more people. And if you are not subscribed yet, go ahead and hit that button too, because trust me, you are going to want to hear what happens next. Here is what really got Linda's friends worried. Paul started pushing Linda to take out another life insurance policy. And not just any policy. He wanted her to get one worth $1 million. $1 million that would go to him if anything happened to her. Now hold on a second. Let me put this in perspective for you. Linda already had life insurance policies worth just under $1 million. She was already well covered. And guess whose name was on some of those policies? That is right, Paul Curry. He was already set to receive $400,000 if Linda died. $400,000 was not enough for this man. He wanted more. He wanted $1 million more on top of what he was already going to get. When Mary, Linda's best friend, heard about this, alarm bells started ringing in her head. This was not normal behavior. What kind of husband pushes his wife to take out more and more life insurance? What kind of husband is that focused on what he will get when his wife dies? Mary sat Linda down and had a serious conversation with her. She managed to talk Linda out of getting that additional policy. Thank goodness for that. But the fact that Paul even asked for it should have been a giant flashing warning sign. Linda wanted so badly to believe that her friends were wrong about Paul. She wanted to prove that he really did love her, so she came up with an idea. In 1993, Linda invited her friend and colleague Frankie Thurber to come stay with them for a while. The plan was simple. Frankie would observe Paul and give Linda an honest opinion. Was he really as bad as everyone said, or were her friends just being overprotective? And you know what happened when Frankie came to visit? Paul transformed into the perfect husband. Every single evening, he would prepare a bubble bath for Linda. Rose petals, candles, the whole romantic setup. Every night he would cook special meals for his wife. Salads and all kinds of fancy dishes. He was attentive. He was loving. He was everything Linda had always wanted him to be. Frankie watched all of this and came to a conclusion. Paul truly loved Linda. There was nothing to be suspicious about. He was a good husband, but here is the thing Frankie did not realize. Paul only acted that way when someone was watching. When it was just him and Linda, he was a completely different person. He put on a show for Frankie, and Frankie fell for it. The rest of Linda's friends remained unconvinced. They still did not trust Paul, and unfortunately, they were right not to. In July of 1993, something started happening to Linda's health. She began experiencing terrible stomach problems, nausea, pain, discomfort that would not go away. On top of that, she started losing weight, not in a healthy way, but in a way that made her look sick and frail. She felt weak all the time, exhausted, like her body was slowly shutting down. Nobody could figure out what was wrong with her. Linda had always been healthy. She took care of herself. She did not smoke. She did not do anything that would explain these sudden mysterious symptoms. Doctors ran tests but could not find a clear cause. It was baffling. By late July, Linda's condition had gotten so bad that she had to be admitted to the hospital. She could not function at home anymore. She needed serious medical attention. And who was right there by her side the entire time? Paul Curry, the devoted husband. He stayed at the hospital with her, never left her alone. Sat in that chair next to her bed day after day, holding her hand, looking worried. At least that is what it looked like to everyone else. Then something happened that should have changed everything. One day, while Linda was lying in her hospital bed, she looked up at her IV bag. Something was not right. The liquid inside looked cloudy. It had a strange color that was not normal. Linda immediately called the nurse and pointed it out. The hospital staff tested the IV solution and discovered something terrifying. The bag contained lidocaine. That is a substance that absolutely should not have been in her IV. Someone had added it. This was serious. Either a hospital staff member had made a terrible mistake, or someone had deliberately tampered with Linda's IV. The police were called to investigate. It did not take long for investigators to narrow down who could have done this. Paul was the only person who had been alone with Linda in that room while she was sleeping. He had access, he had opportunity, and now, looking back at his obsession with life insurance, he had motive. Linda's friends were convinced this had to be Paul. He was trying to kill her right there in the hospital. But when the police questioned Linda, she refused to believe it. Yes, she admitted that her husband would benefit from her death. Yes, she acknowledged that he had access to her IV. But she insisted that Paul loved her. He would never hurt her. This must have been a mistake by the hospital staff. Linda asked for the investigation to be dropped, and because she was the victim and she did not want to press the matter, that is exactly what happened. Case closed. Linda spent 21 days in that hospital recovering from whatever had been making her sick. Slowly, her health improved. She started feeling better, stronger, like herself again. So she went home, back to the beautiful house in San Clemente, back to her husband Paul. For a few months, everything seemed fine. Linda was healthy, life went on. But then December of 1993 came around, and the nightmare started all over again. The stomach problems returned with a vengeance. The weight loss, the weakness, all the same symptoms that had landed her in the hospital before. Linda's body was failing her again, and once again, nobody could explain why. She went back to the hospital, and can you guess what happened next? The exact same thing. Someone tampered with her IV again. The staff found substances in the solution that had no business being there. This was not a coincidence anymore. This was a pattern. This time, the hospital staff took action. They put a notice on Linda's door stating that only medical personnel were allowed to enter. If anyone else wanted to come in, they had to be accompanied by a staff member at all times. This rule was aimed directly at Paul. They were not going to let him be alone with Linda again. But Paul was clever. He managed to get Linda transferred to a different department in the hospital, a department where nobody knew about the previous incidents, a fresh start where he could move around freely without suspicion. Except the truth followed him. When the police confirmed that the same thing had happened again, the new department was put on alert. But once again, Paul managed to escape any real consequences. There was suspicion, but no solid proof, and Linda continued to defend him. Now I need to ask you something. Why do you think Linda kept defending this man? Was it love? Was it denial? Was she so afraid of being alone and having a third failed marriage that she could not see what was right in front of her face? Tell me what you think in the comments, because I really want to understand this. Linda began recovering again. Her health was improving. But before she could go home, something else happened that should have opened her eyes once and for all. Linda asked her best friend Mary to go to the house and bring some personal items to the hospital. Just clothes and things she needed. Mary agreed and drove over to the San Clemente house. When Mary walked into the living room, she noticed something on the coffee table. Papers. A lot of papers spread out across the surface. Now, Mary knew she probably should not look. It was not her business. But something told her to take a closer look. Call it instinct. Call it suspicion. Whatever it was, she listened to it. Those papers were Linda's life insurance policies. All of them, spread out on the table like someone had been going through them, studying them, adding up the numbers. And every single one of them listed Paul Curry as the beneficiary. Mary's blood ran cold. She knew for a fact that these papers had not been on the table when Linda left the house. Linda would have mentioned it, which meant Paul had taken them out. Paul had been sitting there, probably while his wife was fighting for her life in the hospital, counting up how much money he would get when she died. Mary rushed to the hospital and told Linda everything. She hoped this would finally be the proof that opened her friend's eyes. She expected Linda to be horrified, angry, ready to leave. But Linda made excuses. Maybe she had left them out and forgot. Maybe there was an explanation. She did not want to believe the worst about her husband. Mary was desperate. She begged Linda to leave Paul. She told her that he might be the one making her sick, that he might be trying to kill her for the insurance money, that she was in danger. But Linda would not listen. She could not accept that her third marriage was just as much of a failure as the first two. She had invested too much hope, too much of herself into this relationship. Admitting the truth would mean admitting that she had made a terrible mistake. So Linda stood by her husband, and slowly her friendship with Mary began to fade. The phone calls became less frequent. The visits stopped. Linda was isolating herself, whether she realized it or not. Time passed. Months went by. Then on June 9th, 1994, something strange happened. Mary received an email from Paul Curry. Now let me tell you why this was so strange. Paul had never contacted Mary before, not once. He knew Mary did not like him. He knew she did not trust him. There was no reason for him to ever reach out to her. But on that day, he sent her an email. It said that Linda was very ill. They were not sure if she was going to survive. Something about that email did not sit right. It almost felt like Paul was preparing people for what was about to happen. That same night, just around midnight on June 9th, Paul called 911. He told the dispatcher that his wife was very ill, unresponsive, not moving. He needed help immediately. When the paramedics arrived at the house, there was nothing they could do. Linda Curry was already dead, 50 years old, gone. When the news of Linda's death reached her friends, not a single one of them was surprised by who they suspected. Every single person pointed to Paul. Their worst fears had come true. The toxicology reports came back with shocking results. Linda had lethal levels of nicotine in her system when she died. Nicotine, like from cigarettes, but in a pure, concentrated form. And here is the thing about Linda. She was completely opposed to smoking and substances like that. She never touched the stuff. There is no way she would have willingly put that in her own body. On top of that, they found large amounts of sleep medication in her system. She had been sedated, knocked out, unable to defend herself or even know what was happening to her. It was clear that someone had given these substances to Linda, someone who wanted her dead, and everyone knew who that someone was. But there was a problem. There was no direct evidence proving that Paul had administered the poison. No witnesses, no fingerprints on a bottle, nothing concrete that could hold up in a court of law. The case went cold. And Paul Curry? He collected his prize. He inherited Linda's beautiful house in San Clemente. He received $419,000 from her life insurance policies. He even got a monthly pension of $564. All from the woman he had murdered. The only thing he had to share was with Linda's sister, who was also named in the will. At least Linda had made sure her beloved sister would receive something. After Linda's death, another truth came to light. Remember how Paul bragged about being a nuclear engineer, a member of Mensa, a Jeopardy champion with a genius-level IQ? It was all lies. Paul Curry had never finished his studies. He was not a real engineer. He should never have been hired at the nuclear plant in the first place. His entire resume was fake. His whole identity was a carefully constructed lie designed to impress people like Linda. When his employers found out, they could have exposed him publicly. They could have made sure everyone knew what a fraud he was. But because Paul had good relationships with his boss, they gave him an easy way out. He was allowed to resign quietly without anything going on his record. Paul sold Linda's house, took his blood money, and moved far away to Salina, Kansas. He started a brand new life, got a job as a city building inspector, and then, as if nothing had ever happened, he remarried a woman named Teresa. Paul Curry was living free and comfortable while Linda rotted in her grave. He had gotten away with murder. Now, how they finally caught him is absolutely brilliant. But before I tell you, if you are still watching this video, please tap that like button. Just one tap. It really helps me out and tells me you want to hear more stories like this. All right, let me tell you about the woman who refused to let this case die. For years, Linda's murder remained unsolved. Everyone knew Paul did it, but knowing and proving are two very different things. The case sat in a file somewhere, gathering dust, but there was one investigator who could not let it go. Her name was Yvonne Shaw, and in 2007, she decided to reopen the cold case. Now Shaw did not have any new physical evidence. There was no DNA, no murder weapon, nothing that had magically appeared after all these years. What she had was a mountain of suspicion and something even more powerful. Pure logic. Think about it. Linda was found dead in her home with lethal amounts of nicotine in her system. Someone had to have given it to her. There were only two people in that house that night, Linda and Paul. Linda could not have given it to herself. Why? Because she was on strong sleep medication. Once she took those pills, she was knocked out cold. She could not have gotten up, administered poison to herself, and then gone back to bed. It was physically impossible. So if Linda could not have done it to herself, and only two people were in the house, then it had to be the other person. It had to be Paul. Shaw did not need a smoking gun. She just needed to prove what was already obvious. In 2009, Shaw started reaching out to Paul Curry, but she was smart about it. She did not come at him with accusations. She did not treat him like a suspect. Instead, she played dumb. She called him up pretending to be just another investigator trying to tie up some loose ends on an old case. Nothing serious, just clarifying some details, crossing some T's and dotting some I's. Standard bureaucratic stuff. Paul Curry fell for it completely. See, Paul thought he was the smartest person in any room. He had gotten away with murder for over a decade at this point. He was confident, arrogant. He believed he had outsmarted the entire system. So when this seemingly naive investigator called him up just wanting to chat, he welcomed the contact. He was happy to talk. What did he have to worry about? What Paul did not know was that every single word he said was being recorded and analyzed. Shaw played a psychological game with him. She acted sympathetic, understanding, even a little naive, like she was not really sure what she was doing. She made him feel comfortable. She made him feel safe. And slowly, Paul started talking. He opened up about his relationship with Linda, about her health problems, about the night she died. He talked and talked, never realizing he was digging his own grave. Over multiple phone conversations, Shaw caught Paul in contradiction after contradiction, little details that did not match up, things he said one way in the first call and a different way in the second call. He changed his story about how he found Linda's body. He misstated what medication she was taking, small things that might not seem important on their own, but added up to a very clear picture. Paul Curry was a liar, and liars eventually trip over their own lies. Then Shaw made her move. She told Paul she wanted to meet him in person. She needed to wrap up the case files, she said. Just a quick meeting to finalize everything. No big deal. Paul agreed. Why would he not? He still thought he was untouchable. Shaw flew out to Salina, Kansas. She met Paul face to face, and for over an hour they sat and talked. Shaw remained calm, friendly even. She let Paul relax. Let him think everything was going fine. Then, at exactly the right moment, after Paul had completely let his guard down, Shaw gave a signal. Officers who had been waiting nearby approached Paul Curry. They placed him under arrest for the murder of Linda Curry. 20 years after he killed his wife, the handcuffs finally went on. Now I want to ask you something. It took 20 years to get justice for Linda. 20 years for her killer to face consequences. Some people might say that is way too long. Others might say better late than never. What do you think? Should cold cases ever be closed? Or should investigators keep trying no matter how much time passes? Tell me in the comments. Paul Curry was extradited back to California to face charges, and these were serious charges. First-degree murder with special circumstances. The special circumstances being that he killed Linda for financial gain, for money, for the insurance payout. On top of that, he was charged with insurance fraud, because of course he was. The whole thing was about money from the very beginning. When the trial began in September of 2014, the prosecution laid out their case. They brought in expert witnesses who testified that Linda had been injected with a lethal dose of liquid nicotine, not swallowed, injected, while she was sedated with Ambien, completely helpless and unconscious. The evidence was overwhelming. The logic was undeniable. There was only one person who could have done this. On September 30th, 2014, nearly 20 years after Linda Curry died, the jury reached their verdict, guilty on all charges. Paul Curry was sentenced to the maximum penalty, life in prison without the possibility of parole. He would die behind bars. Justice had finally been served. But let us take a moment to appreciate how this happened. Without Yvonne Shaw's strategy, Paul Curry might have lived out his days as a free man. She did not solve this case with fancy forensic evidence or DNA technology. She solved it with patience and psychology. She let Paul think he was smarter than her. She let him get comfortable. She let him talk himself into a corner, and then she snapped the trap shut. That takes a special kind of skill, a special kind of patience. Linda was lucky that someone like Shaw refused to let her case be forgotten. And there was someone else who never gave up, Linda's sister. Remember that close bond they shared? That unbreakable trust? After Linda died, her sister refused to let the case fade away. She worked with authorities. She kept attention on the case. She was vocal about her suspicions regarding Paul. For 20 years, she fought for justice for her sister. That is loyalty. That is love. That is what family is supposed to be. Let me tell you who Linda Curry really was, because it is easy to get lost in the details of the murder and forget about the victim. Linda was a woman of kindness. She had compassion for others. She had strength that carried her through 2 failed marriages and still left her hopeful about love. She was generous with her time and her home. Her friends adored her. Her family loved her deeply. She was remembered for her warmth, for the way she made people feel welcome, for her smile and her hospitality. Linda touched many lives in her 50 years. The assistant district attorney who prosecuted Paul said something that really stuck with me. He said Linda wanted to be loved. She wanted to be treated like a princess. And Paul did exactly that. He told her everything she wanted to hear. But that was the biggest mistake she ever made, believing the lies of a man who only saw her as a payday, and she paid for that mistake with her life. Now I have one final question for you. Paul Curry manipulated Linda for years. She defended him when he tampered with her IV. She defended him when her friends warned her. She defended him right up until the end. Why do you think people stay with abusers even when everyone around them is screaming to get out? I really want to understand this. Tell me your thoughts in the comments. There are lessons in Linda's story that I think we all need to hear. Trust but verify. When someone seems too good to be true, they probably are. Check their background. Ask questions. Do not just believe everything you are told. Red flags matter. When the people who love you are all saying the same thing, maybe it is time to listen. Linda's friends saw the danger before she did. If she had listened, she might still be alive. Love should not blind us. It is beautiful to believe in love. It is beautiful to be hopeful. But that hope should never override your common sense. Your safety matters more than any relationship. Linda deserves so much better than what she got. She deserved a husband who truly loved her. She deserved to live out her years in that beautiful house surrounded by friends. She deserved happiness. Instead, she got Paul Curry, a liar, a fraud, a murderer. But her story is not just one of tragedy. It is also one of resilience, of truth eventually coming to light, of a sister who never stopped fighting, of an investigator who refused to let a killer go free. Linda is gone, but her memory lives on. Her story reminds us to listen to our instincts, to value the friends who try to protect us, to never let love blind us to danger. Thank you so much for listening to Linda's story today. I know it was a heavy one. A woman who just wanted to find love, taken by the very person who promised to love her. It does not get much sadder than that. But justice was served. 20 years late, but it came. And Paul Curry will spend the rest of his miserable life behind bars where he belongs. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you, really, from the bottom of my heart. And if you have not subscribed yet, please consider doing so. Hit that like button too if you have not already. Until next time, stay safe out there. Trust your instincts. Listen to the people who love you. And never let someone else's lies become your truth. Rest in peace, Linda Curry. You will never be forgotten. Goodbye for now.